Hey guys, welcome back to Seagull Football Network. I'm Braden. This is my brother Ben. In case you missed it, we had a 4-hour live stream during the NFL draft. I still haven't recovered on sleep. I don't know if Ben has yet. Probably not, if I had to guess. So today we're going to be talking about the draft and kind of recapping some of what we saw over the 3 days. Some of our favorite teams, the ones that we think improved the most, and the ones that we think improved the least. But first, we do have a couple items of news that came out this week. So let's start off with George Kittle signing an extension with the San Francisco 49ers. There's a 4-year deal worth $76.4 million with $40 million of that guaranteed. Really solid option for them there. He's been great so far in his career, and he is signing on for 4 more years. That's really, really big. And then there's another extension also in the NFC. This time we turn to the NFC North with the Minnesota Vikings extending Andrew Van Ginkel on a 1-year, $23 million deal with 22.4 of that guaranteed. Ben, what are your thoughts on these two extensions?
Yeah, obviously, starting with Kittle, he's been one of the best tight ends in the league for a long time, and he wouldn't be that type of tight end if he weren't in the 49ers system. It's the perfect player fit for the perfect, scheme. And I think that Kyle Shanahan's done a great job with him. He's 31 now. He's really showing no signs of letting up. In fact, he had the second most yards he's had in his entire career last year with the 1,106 and also 8 touchdowns. So, he just continues to be an incredibly versatile weapon, kind of breaking the barriers of what we perceive as a tight end. So, I think that's a great signing. It was super good to see him back at their team activities and everything. It told us, there was an extension coming, and as we see, it came. So I'm really happy for him. Everybody else should be too. That's a great move. The only people that aren't happy, I'm sure, are the rest of the NFC West. As for Andrew Van Ginkel, Brian Flores really just unlocked something in him. Van Ginkel's been a fine, strong side linebacker for a couple of years. He was with Brian Flores in Miami for, I think, a year, 2 years, but he was young then. He was still kind of, a rotational player. But Flores brought him into Minnesota this past year. He was familiar with the system, and he just lit the world on fire. He had 11 and a half sacks, 18 tackles for loss. He had 2 interceptions, both returned for touchdowns. Van Ginkel was incredible in Brian Flores' hyper-aggressive scheme. 1 year, $22 million. That's a lot of money for a not Mike. It's a lot of money even for a Mike. It's any linebacker. That's a lot of money. We should be really happy for Van Ginkel, but it's clear also based on the fact that it is a 1-year extension that they're kind of playing it safe on how long they keep him for. He is going to be 30 in July 1st, I believe. So, he's a very good player, but it's just a question of how much longer is he going to be a good player. He plays incredibly physical, so we just don't really know. But yeah, as long as he's around, that's great for the Vikings, and that's great for Van Ginkel.
Yeah, for sure. One thing that I've really noticed about Van Ginkel, especially last season, is his play recognition is absolutely phenomenal. Those two pick sixes that he had were just beautiful, both of them. Absolutely incredible plays. So I'm really excited to see more of that with the Vikings in this coming season. Jumping in now, let's start off by talking about the teams that we think improved the least, specifically through the draft. So this isn't really an analysis of their entire free agency. We're just going to be talking about the draft specifically. Ben, what team did you pick out as the least improved?
Yeah, so first of all, I do have an honorable mention. I had a couple of teams we were talking earlier that I think just didn't do very well in the draft or that I think didn't improve very much. So my honorable mention is the Cleveland Browns. I think that the trade down for picks and the acquisition of Mason Graham was great. That's one of the best moves I've seen the Browns make in a long time. But they had a lot of positional need across the roster, and I really can't justify going back to running back for two very similar players, as well as doubling the amount of healthy quarterbacks in their locker room, including one of those quarterbacks being Shador Sanders, who he is a good quarterback. I think he is significantly better than his draft slot, but the position group of quarterback for the Cleveland Browns is already touchy for reasons that we all know. And so to bring in somebody with pretty heavily reported personality issues seems ill-advised regardless of the value you get at 144. And finally, I taking a linebacker who isn't named Jihad Campbell at 33, who's pretty far from being developed enough to be a starting Mike linebacker at 33, feels very rich. So overall, it just felt like they weren't valuing their positions well. And again, they doubled up at running back and quarterback, so it just felt a little silly. Anyway, my actual least improved team is the Denver Broncos. Now, I was a fan of some of the Denver Broncos picks, and the Denver Broncos also selected some players who fit needs, but I just think they could have done better in terms of who they selected and when. Their first pick was 20th overall, and they took defensive back Jahdae Barron from Texas. I actually loved the Jahdae Barron pick. It was on record during the live stream. We were both super excited about that. He's just a perfect fit for Vance Joseph's aggressive defense. But that's not what we're talking about. At the second round, 60th pick overall, I was thinking they should probably take a running back or a receiver. They need skill positions desperately, and they did. They took a running back. However, there were a lot of running backs on the board at the time that I think they could have taken and should have taken, and they went for a running back that I definitely didn't expect here, and that is R.J. Harvey out of UCF. That was pretty shocking for me. After watching him, me personally, I had like a 5th round grade on him. I could see him going in the 4th. His vision was just middling. He's very small with pretty much no contact balance to speak of. And I just don't feel like he is a second rounder. He's more of a change of pace back, especially as a rookie. I can see him developing eventually, but just definitely not in the early seasons. He needs some time. He tends to dance around in the backfield, and he's small. He's not ready for the NFL. But apparently Sean Payton liked him a lot, and if he was happy enough with him, then to each their own. But I just am not sure Harvey was the right move with objectively better, more ready to start running backs on the board. A very similar situation happened in the 3rd round, 74th overall, when the Broncos took Illinois wide receiver Pat Bryant, another position that they needed, but in my opinion, just not the right player. Pat Bryant felt like a really massive reach, even more than RJ Harvey, in my opinion, considering especially what other receivers were on the board at the time. Considering, what receiver they let Kansas City get, I think just 40 picks later. Bryant is a fine route runner with the routes that he knows, but he really needs to diversify those routes a lot. He's got good length down the sideline to bring in those reach balls, but the problem arises because he doesn't really have play speed or play strength like an NFL player. So he's got that reach, but any cornerback who matches him in speed, strength, athleticism, he's just going to get beat, and he is way too easily beat off the line in press coverage. Under Payton, that West Coast offense, Payton really he made that offense perfected in New Orleans. He may be able to scheme Pat Bryant open, but again, I just think there were more physical and more applicable route runners on the board that they could have taken that were a better value at 74. At the bottom of the 3rd, the Broncos took defensive end Savion Jones from LSU. I think Jones was a great value at the bottom of the 3rd. He fits as a great passing down rusher. He could definitely use some improvement before he's an every down rusher, but he's got really good tools. He just needs to kind of work on his run defense a little bit more. So I liked that pick. In the 4th round, 134th overall, they took linebacker Quandarius Robinson, also known as Q Robinson. He's not a defensive player. He was an outside linebacker at Alabama, and he was a special teamer for every year but one in his 4-year college career. And I see that as exactly the same going into the NFL. He doesn't have the tools, the size, the strength, the speed to be anything more than a special teamer. He might be able to drop in on some, pass rush plays, but it's just not going to be what we want or expect from a good pass rusher in the 4th round. So once again, it just feels like they had needs and they just didn't really pay attention to them. They took a player that doesn't fit a defensive need, and they took a special teamer in the 4th round. That's way too early for that valuation. Then in the 6th round, 216th overall, they took punter Jeremy Crawshaw. He's an Australian punter out of the Florida University. Taking a punter in the 6th round isn't a bad move. It happens every year pretty much, and he's by far the best punter in the class. But adequate punters and kickers can always be found after the draft and for cheap on the open market. And just when you're looking at a team that just took a couple of players that frankly don't really fit what they need, again, it just feels rich for them. It just feels like maybe they're not paying attention to their board as much as they should. And then finally, their last pick in the draft was the 7th round, 241st overall. And here they took tight end Caleb Lawner out of Utah. Once again, I just don't see it. Caleb Lawner was a basketball player at Utah, and he only played on the football team his senior year. He caught 4 passes as a one-trick pony red zone type of tight end. He really wasn't anything special. He's just big, and so they just throw it to him in the red zone. That's fine on a college roster because on a college roster, you have unlimited roster spots. In the NFL, you've only got 53. So he really had no place being drafted because if you throw an undrafted free agent contract at him or a camp invite, then you hope lightning strikes and you hope you end up with a player that works. But you're wasting a draft pick on a player who, in my opinion, is highly unlikely to make the 53-man roster. So it just seemed like yet again another overvaluation. Overall, it seems like Sean Payton is trusting himself a little bit too much in his ability to develop offensive playmakers rather than just letting the board come to him. Defensively, in my opinion, the draft was great. They had great players on the defense, but they only drafted a few defensive players, and Q Robinson doesn't count. Again, late 4th, just absolutely egregious for him. Overall, Jahdae Barron, the first-round pick, great value, but outside of that, it's just tough to see the vision.
Interesting. Yeah, so we discussed this briefly before recording, and we both disagree with who each other picked for the least improved team. I think obviously Jahdae Barron, phenomenal pick, absolutely incredible. He's going to fit right in on that defense. He'll be able to play wherever they need him to, and he's going to be great. I really like RJ Harvey personally. I think, yeah, I picked him out as my underrated running back in that episode, and I really like what I saw from him. I completely disagree with your comment on him having no contact balance. I think he was actually great at that, especially given his size. But of course, we might have seen different things. Pat Bryant, I do understand what you're saying of him being a little bit of a reach. Sean Payton did say that he saw little bits of Michael Thomas in him. And so, maybe he thinks that he'll be able to draw that out. And it's certainly possible that he's, overestimating his abilities. Sean Payton is.
I gotta interrupt you a little bit here. Just, yeah, sure, maybe he saw a little bit of Michael Thomas in Pat Bryant. Yeah, and I saw a little bit of Baker Mayfield and Dylan Gabriel. It doesn't mean that they're the same player or they're going to be as successful as each other. It's just not how that works.
Right. No, I don't disagree.
And as for RJ Harvey, I'm not saying he's a bad running back. I just don't see him as a 300 carry running back. I don't see him as an every down running back. And that's what Denver needed. And for them to use the 60th overall pick, a second rounder on a running back who is not going to be able to withstand 300 carries a year, it's not smart.
I don't know. I mean, we don't know like if he was even going to be there next. Maybe there was another team coming up shortly after that was targeting him as well. Like, we just don't know that kind of thing. And so if they felt like that was their guy and that's who they wanted, I could see them, reaching a little bit to make sure they got him. I'll totally agree on Q Robinson, though. I don't think he's going to be very good. I think that's one of the worst picks of the draft in total. But then I really actually like their last 2 picks. Caleb Lohner he's a developmental guy. He's coming into a room with quite a few veteran tight ends, including Evan Engram, who's likely to be the starter. He doesn't have to be incredible right out the gate. They just want somebody to come in, learn, and maybe have that potential to start in a couple years. Jeremy Crawshaw, I think he's going to be great. Like you said, he's definitely the best punter, and I don't mind them using a 6th-round pick on a punter at all. I mean, the Bears spent a 4th on Torrey Taylor just last year, so I really like the 6th-round pick on a punter here.
I said it. Yeah, I said it. I mean, of all the picks, the punter's not what I'm complaining about. It's far from it. My 2 biggest gripes are Harvey and Bryant. Those are my 2 biggest gripes. Like, I have an issue with Q Robinson, but it's whatever. Throw away a 4th rounder. I have an issue with Lohner, but whatever. Throw away a 7th rounder, especially a 7th. But you're really going to use your 2nd rounder on a guy who just will not be able to maintain a starting running back level of contact, and then a 3rd rounder on a receiver who can't even beat press coverage at all. Every press rep I watched him on, he just didn't do anything. I don't know. It's just all the right positions, all the wrong times. That's what I saw out of this draft.
Yeah, I fully disagree on Harvey. And that's, that might be something that we look at in a couple months, and I'm trying to forget that I ever said anything about that. But I really, really liked what I saw from him. I like his physicality. Even, he is on the small side. But despite that, I think he's going to be a really, really solid back. And there's a good chance that they're still looking to kind of run a committee back kind of system like they did previously. Now, obviously, it wasn't successful before, but maybe the addition of RJ Harvey will kind of open that up a little bit better. But yeah, we'll definitely just have to see. All right. Moving on though, the team that I picked out, and we've talked about this, like I said, and you disagree with me. The team that I picked out as least improved through the draft is the San Francisco 49ers. It's really unfortunate that the Niners, who were already in a pretty tough spot with their roster, having a lot of people leave throughout the free agency period. I feel like they did so little to address their real needs, and I'm not the only person who feels that way. Both PFF and SIS both ranked them last in their draft rankings, with SIS ranking 8 out of their 11 picks under a 5.9 rating out of 10. Michael Williams, the first round pick, he's really solid against the run. I'll give him that. He's great against the run. He's not amazing at pass rush, which is kind of what you would expect a little bit more. Now, if there's going to be a good place for him to develop those skills, I think San Francisco is a great place for that. So he could definitely end up being a really, really solid first rounder. But, he is definitely still developing. He's not my concern. Alfred Collins was their second round pick, defensive tackle, also solid against the run. I think he's also a really good addition to that defense. I'm not sure that those were necessarily the right positions to add on defense after the loss of a couple linebackers, some safeties, and I think their secondary needs a little bit more help as well. But, like we talked about during the draft, some of that help up front will kind of cover up some of the issues in the secondary a lot of the time. We both projected the Niners going for pass defense early, and they didn't address that until the third round with linebacker Nick Martin and cornerback Upton Stout. Martin is a pretty solid prospect, but not really the caliber I expected. And like we said, the linebacker class wasn't as great as maybe it could have been. But losing Greenlaw, it's kind of hard to see him slotting right in and kind of filling that spot. So I think he's going to need a little bit more development. And as for Stout, he's primarily a nickel corner, which I really don't like, given the fact that it feels like nickel is already their strongest position in the secondary. I'm not a big fan of their two outside corners. I cannot remember his name currently, but the guy that they have in the slot currently, I like him.
Diamador Lenore?
Yes, that's right. He's my favorite corner that they have. So it just felt a little weird to continue stacking on that position. Then in the fourth round, they took another defensive tackle and a receiver. I'm a little surprised it took them that long to get a receiver, especially given the fact that they currently have, a recovering Ayuk, who everybody thought was going to be traded, and Ricky Pearsall, who's, coming off of his rookie season. And obviously they have George Kittle as well, but specifically at the receiver position, I feel like they need quite a bit of help there. They then finished out the draft with a running back, safety, quarterback, guard, and then another receiver in the seventh. For a team that had 11 picks, I just wasn't really impressed with the actual quality of a lot of those. And, we've talked about the 49ers kind of always feel like they're in contention for the Super Bowl or at the very least the playoffs. But I just don't, it feels like they don't know how to get back to that after, having such a dismal 2024. I know you disagree with me. What are your thoughts on the Niners draft, and why do you think it's better than I do?
I don't disagree that it's not the strongest class they could have been, okay? But I do disagree that it's the least improved. I look at it as a step to getting back to contention. I think the 49ers realized that they couldn't keep this up. They couldn't keep sitting here and selling their souls to contend every year and then just having a year where injuries destroy their team. I think they realized they had to start young. They had to start anew. And to do that, you've got to wipe out everything. And that's why their free agency was so brutal. Michael Williams, well, first of all, I'll start with this. I mentioned it during the draft, but I didn't really have time to go into it. Chris Kokorek is the San Francisco 49ers defensive line coach. He is the most revered defensive line coach in the NFL. He's been in the NFL for years and years and years, since 2009. He was also a drafted defensive lineman. He's been coaching since 2003. Okay, he's an incredibly revered defensive line coach. He is, according to most, the best defensive line coach. He's the San Francisco 49ers defensive line coach. If anybody's going to get Michael Williams to the level that he needs to be, it's going to be Kokorek. And Michael Williams, in my opinion, was the highest ceiling defensive, or I guess edge rusher there was. So yeah, maybe his pass rushing isn't top tier now, but it will be. And to get a very good run defender early who will develop into an edge rusher, to get two defensive linemen who Alfred Collins was great. I mean, he shouldn't have been in the second round, maybe earlier in the second round. And then CJ West, I liked him. I didn't watch a lot on him, but he's a great three tech. I think the defensive line drafting was great, especially with Kokorek. They know they can develop players well. Nick Martin actually is projected currently to play strong side linebacker, and I agree with you. I'm not a fan there, but again, I think they think they have to start young and they have to develop players. They can't keep just signing great players and hoping, right? Or accidentally drafting guys in the sixth, think like Hufanga or Brock Purdy. They know they have to start somewhere. So I agree. I'm not necessarily the biggest fan, but I think they took sure prospects. They took guys where they know what the quantity is. They say, Alfred Collins, we know who he is, we know what he can do, and we know what our coaching staff can do. And that's the same thing they did with Upton Stout. I think that Stout doesn't really project to nickel. I think that he is going to play all kinds of positions in the secondary. Saleh, I think, has interesting plans for him because Stout had very good eyes in coverage. So I think, yeah, he's a little small, but I think he's going to be an interesting little piece for them. You guys remember that. I agree. Maybe receiver was a little bit late, but I think, again, they really wanted to rejuvenate that defense before they focused anywhere else. And frankly, Jordan Watkins getting him at 138, that's not bad value. They've got their starting three. They've got Jennings, Pearsall, Ayuk. So to bring in Jordan Watkins, who hopefully doesn't have to start, but if Ayuk, his recovery's behind or somebody gets injured, Watkins can start, and it's good value. He's not the best receiver on the board. Okay, he's no Tetaroa McMillan, but he's a good receiver for sure. And so I liked him at 138. So overall, yeah, was it the strongest class? No. But I think they got solid guys that they knew who they were. They knew what their coaching could do with them. And they just played it safe this year, which to me is a stepping stone to getting to competing again. You can't just compete in a turnaround in 1 year. It's not sustainable. And I think they know that. So I liked their class. As a whole, no, but I like what their approach is. I like what they're trying to do here.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, again, it's just going to be one of those things that we're going to have to see how it plays out. The draft is so volatile. We never really know what anybody's going to end up looking like in the NFL. But with that being said, let's move on to talk about the teams that we feel improved the most through the draft. You have one honorable mention or two?
I have one honorable mention.
All right, go for it.
That is the New England Patriots. I was a huge fan of what the Patriots did. The reason that they aren't my most improved team is I feel that they still have improvement to go. Similar to the 49ers, I see it as, hey, great job taking steps, great job doing what you could. The drafting of Will Campbell, Travion Henderson, and Kyle Williams back-to-back, that's an insane triple header of offensive players. That is going to make an immediate impact on Drake May's development and Josh McDaniels' offense as a whole. Then on the back end of the draft, head coach Mike Vrabel, he knew, let the offense get their guys early, and he knew he could implement his philosophy on defense and special teams by bringing in very strong physical hard workers, the Vrabel type, all the way through Mr. Irrelevant. DB Kobe Minor, I think he really has a chance to make an impact on defense as a rotational player. Overall, it was a very solid draft. It's not going to be a competing team this year, but that is the first step, and it is a good, solid, strong step in a multi-year process. So I was really happy to see New England really making those changes, which we haven't seen in the last couple of years. The tail end of Belichick and the Gerard Mayo year. But my favorite team, my most improved draft class, is the Seattle Seahawks. I'm already on record to be a pretty big fan of the Seattle Seahawks and their team this year. I like what they're putting together. I love Kubiak's offense. Mike McDonald is just an evil mastermind. So I'm already a big fan of them. And then they just went and stole my heart with that first round pick, 18th overall. I think that was genuinely one of my favorite selections of the entire draft. In fact, they probably had a couple of my favorite selections of the draft in terms of player and player to scheme fit. Anyway, 18th overall, the Seattle Seahawks took offensive lineman Gray Zabel out of North Dakota State. It's not often that general manager John Schneider commits this much draft capital to the offensive line. I said it during the live stream. He doesn't usually draft offensive linemen in the first round very much, really ever, except for Charles Cross. But if there was a player to spend that capital on, it is 100% Zabel. Throughout college, he played all positions on the offensive line except for center, but snapping experience was something that he quickly caught on with many teams in his extensive pre-draft journey. A lot of teams asked him to snap because they were like, well, if you can play the other four positions, let's see if you can do center. And he could. He did it just fine. He had no issue. So Seattle does have an immediate need at left guard, so I believe Zabel will slot in at left guard immediately, where he will make an impact on day one. However, he's also flexible enough that in the case of injury, which happens a lot on the Seattle offensive line pretty much every year, he can flex outside or inside to center without losing a step. He can play tackle, he can play guard, he can play center. He's best at guard, and I think he will be an all-pro guard, but he really can do whatever he needs. Left guard is where he's going to be for the beginning of the season, though, if I am correct. Really, it's a versatile piece. In my opinion, like I said, one of the best selections of the draft, one of my favorite players in the draft, and one of my favorite player-to-team fits. Second round, 35th overall, third pick in the second round. The Seattle Seahawks took a player that I think you and I both had first-round grades on, and that is safety Nick Emenwari out of South Carolina. And really, of all the teams that could have drafted Emenwari, Seattle is literally the best situation that he could have ended up in. Head coach Mike McDonald, he loves his versatile safeties. His coverage style is super multiple, very aggressive, and Emenwari fits that perfectly. With McDonald's specialization in DB work especially, I think Emenwari has a chance to be an all-pro in literally 2 or 3 years. He's going to be a great player for years to come. Think Cam Chancellor, but even more explosive and more versatile. While Zabel was my favorite draft pick for the Seattle Seahawks, Emenwari was real close to it, and once again, one of my all-time 2025 player-to-team fits. I just was so happy with both of those picks. Now, another pick that I was just so happy with. Second round, 50th overall, tight end Elijah Arroyo out of Miami, Florida. Once again, if there's a system for Arroyo to land in, offensive coordinator Gary Kubiak's system in Seattle was probably one of the best ones he could land in. Now, Arroyo does have serious injury concerns, and I think we talked about that a couple weeks ago. But if he can overcome those concerns, he is a great prospect as a receiving tight end from inline and out wide. He's definitely better out wide. He's not the best blocking tight end, but there's space to improve, especially in a offense like Kubiak's. Cam Ward was his quarterback at Miami, and with Ward's huge arm, Arroyo proved that he was a really great deep threat as a tight end. I mean, he ran a lot of different seam plays and stuff like that, and you don't expect to see a tight end run that fast, but he did. He didn't test super fast, but just watch the film. He's a lot faster in play. And being drafted to Seattle, another benefit is he gets to sit under Noah Fant for the time being, and that allows him to really perfect that blocking, come in on rotational plays, 2 tight end plays, and again, 50th overall is great value where Seattle got him. Another player that I just loved here, third round, 92nd overall, quarterback Jalen Milroe out of Alabama. He was one of my favorite prospects out of the entire draft class. Seattle, they got a great QB here to really train under Sam Darnold. They can keep Sam Darnold by his contract anywhere between 1 year and 3 years, which means if they decide after this year, maybe Darnold wasn't the right fit or, he struggled or whatever the case is, but they feel Milroe's ready, they can get rid of him. Or in 3 years, they can get rid of him. That really gives them flexibility to let Milroe sit in that Kubiak offense, which is a great fit for him, by the way. Master his processing, master that full field awareness, work on his pocket presence, and he just gets to, hold a clipboard and wear a hat, and his time will come, and very soon. Jalen Milroe, I fully expect to be the starting quarterback for the Seattle Seahawks in just a year or two. Great value in the third round. because, like I said, Seattle doesn't know for sure if and when Darnold will be leaving Seattle. So I love Milroe there. Fifth round, 142nd overall, defensive lineman Riley Mills out of Notre Dame. Mills is the prototypical Mike McDonald defensive lineman. Disruptive, quick, can play anywhere from 3 tech to 5 tech. He really allows that positional versatility that McDonald loves. He's not the greatest run defender right now, and he's coming off a pretty serious knee injury. But in the fifth round, 142, that's great. That's a great place for him to come in, have the flexibility to develop and contribute on a 3-down basis in a couple of years, more likely. I like it a lot. Fifth round is no biggie, so I like that draft pick. Fifth round, 166th overall, another player that I really like to Seattle, and that's Colorado State's wide receiver Torrey Horton. He was a dominant number 1 receiver in the Mountain West Conference, not the biggest football conference. And because of that, he doesn't necessarily project as a dominant number 1 receiver in the NFL. But he was a multiple-time 1,000-yard receiver at Colorado State before a knee injury cut short that final college season. So I think, with coming off that knee injury, being an MWC wide receiver, he's still great immediate value in the fifth round. I had a late third or early fourth round, grade on him, so I'm really happy with that. He's got great speed, decent size, great projection as a rotational receiver early in his career. I think he will very soon fit the role that Marquez Valdes-Scantling fits currently in the Seattle offense, stretching the field, creating a legit, intermediate to deep option where they've got that, the Kubiak offense. It likes to stay low, give yourself easy reads, but you always like to have those deep shots. And MVS plays that right now, but I think in a couple of years, as he improves his route tree, rehabs that knee, Torrey Horton will be a very formidable deep target, especially when Jalen Milroe is the quarterback for the Seattle Seahawks. Fifth round, 175th overall. This pick was interesting. They took tight end Robbie Ousts from Alabama. I wasn't the biggest fan of this pick in the fifth round, just because of positional valuation, but he has the potential to be a very good fit in the Seattle offense, so they probably took him before anybody else took a flyer on him later in the draft, 6th or 7th round. He projects essentially as a small O-lineman. He's 274 pounds, and he has the frame to put on a few more pounds. He's pretty fast for that size with a 4.91 40-yard dash. It really caused a lot of analysts to project him as a fullback type of position in like a gap scheme type of offense that needs one. Seattle does need one. So I think, for them, it was an early flyer. It might not work out, but if it does, it gives them a great blocker from inline or in the backfield. And, he projects to really last for a long time, barring injury. So I think that's a great fit. Like I said, maybe a little early, but I'm not too opposed to it. In the 6th and 7th rounds, they took 2 offensive linemen, Bryce Cabledew and offensive lineman Mason Richmond, Kansas and Iowa, and they were both multi-year starters at tackle. I think they probably have the length and speed to play tackle or guard, but they're likely going to move into guard just because they don't necessarily have the awareness that you need to play tackle. But the great part about this is it was 192nd overall and 234th overall. Those are great positions to bring in just rotational depth guys. I think both of them could possibly develop into starters eventually, but really the goal for those types of picks is just to have some depth. And Seattle's offensive line depth is really bad. So I'm a fan of this personally. I think it's great for them to come in and just kind of, again, late round flyers, come in, probably compete for depth, likely win the depth. So I'm a fan. 7th round, 223rd overall. Running back Damian Martinez, also from Miami. Running back of this potential and this college experience never should have been available in the 7th round. I had, a 4th or 5th round grade on him, but I definitely feel he can be better in the NFL. Obviously, like I said, Seattle found value at every single level of this draft, so I'm not surprised. Martinez is capable of being a Kenneth Walker-esque starter in the NFL. Durability and strength to take on 200, 250 plus carries a year. And really, it makes him the perfect player to take a flyer on late. Kenneth Walker struggled with some injury last year, as we talked about before. Martinez would be a near one-to-one replacement for that if he does get injured. And if in a few years Walker's up for a contract and Seattle doesn't feel like paying that, Damian Martinez could totally become one of the cheapest starting running backs in the league and be a one-to-one replacement for him full-time. I'm a huge fan of the pick in the 7th round. And finally, another one that I just think was absurd value for where they picked. 7th round, 238th, wide receiver Ricky White out of UNLV. Another high performing, Mountain West Conference wide receiver, White had 1,800 yards in 2023 and just over 1,000 in 2024. At the NFL level, he definitely lacks play size and strength. He's only, 6'1", I think 190. A lot of analysts projected him to a move to slot receiver because of that. But while this might be true, an underrated trait White has, in spite of his draft position, is his sneaky intelligence. He's got a Cooper Kupp-like skill at finding the opening in his own coverage, sitting down in it, making the catch, and making yards after catch. Also, he has a very deep route tree, one of the deepest I watched, with great cut ability, crafty double moves. He's really good at just getting away from players. So maybe he doesn't have the strength, but if you play him in the right scheme, like Seattle, I think he has the chance to be a future starter for Seattle for many, many years, especially with very good scheming. So that's Seattle's draft class. Deep breath. I'm really happy with that. That draft class, in my opinion, is the strongest in the NFL this year.
Yeah, I will say I'm really, really impressed with how Seattle did kind of address a lot of their need, especially right out of the gate with Zabel. Like I've talked about, they're going to have to protect Darnold if they want him to be anything, remotely similar to his Minnesota Vikings tenure. And I think Gray Zabel is going to be a really, really foundational piece for that. I kind of think he unites the whole offensive line together and really ties it up nicely. I love the Nick Emmanwori pick. I think either Seattle or the Commanders were just the best spots for him to land. Especially because with Seattle, right? They already have two pretty solid safeties. They've got Kobe Bryant and they've got Julian Love, who were both really solid last year. But like we talked about with Emmanwori, his ability to move around the defense to almost any position in the secondary is going to be really, really useful, especially given the fact that they have two good safeties, but they'll be able to slot him in anywhere that they want to.
But that's the thing about McDonald's defense is he's got a positionless defense. He's not playing, oh, you're a safety, you're a cornerback. They play where they play. And he is an incredible DB coach. That's what he did coming up in the Baltimore Ravens defense under Wink Martindale. He's a DB coach. That's what he does. And he's not sitting there playing, oh, you're safety, you're a DB, you're a cornerback. No. Everybody plays everywhere. And Emmanwori fits even better there. It's not about they have two starting safeties. It's they have a great DB that they just added to a great DB room.
Yeah. Arroyo, I'm a really big fan of. I think he's going to be great. A big-bodied receiver pretty much for Darnold to target. So I think that's going to be really helpful in their offense. I definitely think one of the most interesting picks that, could be one of the better value is Jalen Milroe. I really don't know what to make of him yet. And I think he's definitely going to need to sit for a little bit and develop. I've seen him compared a lot to Jalen Hurts, but, even less developed at this point than I think Hurts was. A lot of Milroe, from what I saw, is he takes off running. He doesn't really look for a pass necessarily right off the bat. And then he's, not the most effective passer either. And so I think with development, he could easily be a Jalen Hurts type quarterback. And I think that could be really, really useful, especially for the Seahawks. But, it's going to be that question of is he going to develop correctly? Is Darnold the right guy for him to learn from? Is this the right system? I think it's going to be a good system, generally speaking. But I think that's one of the more interesting picks to keep an eye on and see how is this going to work out? Is this, the right decision? But I definitely agree. I think the Seahawks did a really good job generally. I also, like you said, I love the value in those last two offensive linemen late. I think is going to be really, really helpful for them. I'm surprised they ended up picking 3 linemen, honestly. That's pretty abnormal for the Seahawks generally. So I do have an honorable mention for most improved team. I think this is one of the teams that has kind of won the entire offseason generally, from free agency to the draft. And then, they had a really big move just after the draft as well, and that is the Carolina Panthers. I love almost every single thing the Panthers have done so far. I liked what they were doing at the end of last season. I thought they really kind of figured out what to do on offense. Their defense was, not amazing, but they had little bits and pieces that were like, okay, I can see this. I see the vision. And so I really like what they've been doing. Tet McMillan at number 8 overall. We were both expecting defense. I think we were both a little bit surprised that it was McMillan. But the more I sat and thought about that pick, the more I really loved it. And then the move that they made just after the draft was signing wide receiver Hunter Renfrow, who took a year off because he was dealing with some illness. He was really struggling there, but wanted to come back and play, and he loves the state of South Carolina and wanted to play there, so he was able to sign on with the Carolina Panthers. But I also like what they did on defense throughout the draft. They got a couple edge players, they got a safety, they got a nose tackle. They really addressed some of those needs, and I think it was generally good value. But they're not the team that I think had the best draft overall. That team is the Las Vegas Raiders, who I think have won the offseason entirely. With 11 selections, the Raiders definitely had the opportunity to draft purely for quantity and not quality, but instead they did manage to do both. Despite all of the talk of teams moving ahead of them to pick up Genty, whether it was the Jaguars or the Bears or anybody else, nobody did, and the Raiders were able to get him. I think this is a huge pick. Genty is absolutely the best running back in this draft. It's not even close. Like we talked about previously, his yards after contact were the second best running back in college football, which is just bonkers. He joined Saquon Barkley and LaDainian Tomlinson as one of the few running backs taken in the top 10. There's not many of them. Most of them ended up having really solid careers. There's still a couple floating around currently with Barkley and Ezekiel Elliott. And then with the 58th pick in the draft in the second round, they took wide receiver Jack Beck. He has potentially one of the most emotionally moving stories from the draft. His brother was one of the victims of the terrorist attack in New Orleans, and his brother Jack has been doing a really good job of honoring him through all of that. So kind of a really good story there. He looks to kind of help out in the slot, which I think is a really good position, something that they needed a little bit there in Las Vegas. They've got Jacoby Myers out on the outside. They've got Brock Bowers. Now they've got more of a slot receiver who can help out over the middle. In the third round, they selected Iowa State cornerback Darren Porter, who has a lot of really physical upside. He's not necessarily the most refined player yet, but physically he has a lot of upside. He's very talented. And I think he could end up being a starter for them pretty easily. They then used back-to-back picks to get 2 offensive linemen. And you and I talked about this the night of the draft, that second night. The first that they picked was Caleb Rogers from Texas Tech. And then the next pick, immediately after, they picked Charles Grant from William & Mary. I talked about Charles Grant in our offensive line look ahead for the draft, and I really like this pick. Caleb Rogers, also a great player. But like we talked about, Grant is a really solid developmental player. He's not necessarily ready to start immediately. But with all of the struggles that the Raiders have had with the run game and with their offensive line, I think there's a really good chance that if he can improve over the offseason, if he can get enough coaching, that he could end up slotting in and starting this season. So those were just phenomenal picks all the way through there. They then ended up finishing out the draft with another receiver, 2 defensive tackles, 2 quarterbacks, and a linebacker. I feel like they addressed all of their needs with really good value picks and are poised to have a great season. Honestly, I think potentially one of the biggest question marks for this team is Pete Carroll. He's getting a little bit older. He had a couple not as high quality seasons late in Seattle. So I think one of the bigger questions is can he maintain the same level of performance that he's historically set? Honestly, I don't really have many doubts. And I think the Raiders could be kind of a surprise team this season. What did you think about the Raiders draft?
I besides the Seahawks, they were my favorite draft by far, and the only reason I chose the Seahawks over them is I believe the Seahawks got more starters who will be on the field day one, right? Genty, obviously, I don't even have to talk about that because everybody knows what that is. Jack Best, incredible draftee, 58th overall, I think was really good value for him. I think he fits Chip Kelly's offense incredibly well. Darren Porter, great cover 3 corner. I mean, he fits Pete Carroll. He's physical. He's strong. He beats the crap out of receivers. I mean, he's the perfect Pete Carroll corner. Caleb Rogers and Charles Grant, I believe both have starting roles on that offensive line by week 1. I see no reason why they shouldn't, because at right tackle, Delmar Glaze, come on now. Charles Grant is a whole lot better than him. DJ Glaze was not good at all last year. He was one of the worst graded tackles. And Charles Grant, yeah, he's William and Mary. Yeah, he's not the greatest tackle on the board, but I think that he fits well in this offense. I think that that was an incredible pick, and I see no reason why they take 2 back-to-back linemen in the 3rd round if they don't plan to start them now or very, very soon. As for Caleb Rogers, I think he slots in over Jordan Meredith at left guard. Right now, again, Jordan Meredith is predicted to start over him, but I just don't think that's going to last. I don't think they're going to see these guys through all of training camp and let them sit on the bench. I don't see it. Incredible players. The middle of that draft, Dante Thornton, Tonka Hemingway, JJ Pegwise, big fan. A lot of those guys are rotational though, so again, that's why I graded Seattle over them. But I like the positional drafting, right? They know what they need in terms of depth, and they get it. The 2 quarterbacks back to back in the 6th round, it was actually 213 and 215. I liked it a lot because at 213 they took Tommy Mellett. Tommy Mellett was the Montana State quarterback for a lot of years, I believe 4. The thing that a lot of people don't know is he actually played quarterback and receiver in high school, and he committed to Montana State to play receiver. But he ended up being the best quarterback on their roster, and after his freshman year as a receiver, he played 3 years straight of quarterback. He is an incredibly athletic guy. I mean, he's only 5'10", but he's incredibly athletic, super fast, great hands. So the Raiders have been pretty straightforward, especially, they've got Tom Brady in that front office. They are very clear. They want to Julian Edelman. They want him to play receiver. They want him to be a return man. They want him to play slot receiver. They want him to play anywhere where they can use his speed and his athleticism to their benefit. And they might use him in some wildcat, because that's how Mellett became a quarterback at Montana State. Was they first kind of started throwing him in under center and saying, oh, he's actually a good passer too. Cam Miller, though, is the real backup here. I believe Cam Miller projects as the number 2 under Geno Smith over Aiden O'Connell. 1, he's cheaper at this point. 2, North Dakota State runs an offense that really sets Cam Miller up to be successful in Chip Kelly's offense. So that means that, if Geno Smith goes down, if, he needs to go out for an injury or whatever, I think that Cam Miller can come in and run the offense adequately for that purpose. So I'm a big fan of this draft class. If it wasn't an immediate starter, they got guys who could be eventually, or who would at least be great slot-ins as depth pieces, special teamers. So overall, a very solid draft, better than the Raiders have done since, I'd say, probably 2020. Tom Brady's making stuff happen, so it's a great draft class for them. All right, so that concludes all of our NFL draft coverage for the 2025 season. We went through every position. We watched a bunch of film, hours of film, and now we have recapped our favorite teams. We'd love to hear your questions in the comments about what we think of other draft classes. We check our comments every day. We'd love to hear it. Thank you guys so much for watching. Keep an eye out. In the next couple of weeks, we're going to be starting to do our divisional deep dives. We take a division, we deep dive into every single team in that division, and we talk about their strengths, their weaknesses, their best rookie, where we think they'll rank, their record that we think they're going to have. This is my favorite part of what we did last year for the 2024 season, so I'm excited to kind of make those changes that we talked about for 2025 and see kind of what we do. So keep an eye out for those. Once again, thanks so much for watching. Make sure to hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you later.